Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this new video in which we continue our close reading of Dialectic of Enlightenment by Theodor, Adorno and Horkheimer. Today we're going to read the third section of the culture industry, and it's going to be a long video because, well, it's not that the section is long, it's just about 12 pages, but let's just say that there is a lot to talk about, there is a lot to say in this section. So let's just jump right into it. So in this section, we are actually going to continue the discussion that we engaged in last time with with the theme of style, but this time it's going to be in relation with liberalism. So the focus on liberalism, and thus this will be the longest section because we also have to understand what we mean by liberalism and how does it relate to the culture industry. Now, liberalism is, from the first sentence of the section, it is giving a very paradoxical nature regarding style. They write, the culture industry, the most inflexible style of all, thus proves to be the goal of the very liberalism which it criticized for its lack of style. So we need to understand this. We need to understand that the culture industry is first the result of liberalism, and that liberalism is marked by a lack of style, which produced the most inflexible style of all. So what does this mean? Now, liberalism can be understood for our purposes here as the right to move freely without having anyone checking on your movements. This, in theory, means not just the movement of physical bodies, but also of ideas, and more importantly, of capital. It's also about being able to do commerce with whomever you like, where or whenever you like. So liberalism therefore states that there can be no authority to impose on you a certain worldview, especially a moral worldview. Individuals are free to do what they want as long as they don't hurt others or deprive them of their freedom to do the same. We'll talk a bit more about morality when we do a close reading of the second excursus. So within this liberal sphere of circulation, the culture industry was forming itself. Free circulation entails that the natural world must be safe and domesticated enough for people to travel safely. The world so started to be more and more planned, more controlled, so that the circulation of goods, capital, newspapers and magazines can be guaranteed. So for this end, the idea of style had to be abolished. Style was seen as way too conservative. It was seen as too rigid, too elitist for the masses that now have, the liberty to circulate. Shakespeare, for example, Shakespeare is like, writing with, is someone who is writing with style, and it is, Shakespeare is somehow an obstacle to free movement, but newspapers are the kind of literature for people in a hurry, for people who are going from place to place, who are constantly moving. And as such, a lack of style became the sign of liberty and freedom. So liberalism is a lack of style. But of course, those who criticize liberalism for its lack of style don't see how this lack generated an even more rigid style, a more totalizing and wider style. And so this new style, being more rigid and inflexible than the old elitist style, is paradoxical. Because on the one hand, the rigid style of the ancients prevents free circulation, but on the other, the more rigid style of the culture industry allows for free circulation. So how can this be? Well, the answer is that the circulation that is maintained by liberalism is everything but free. It is free only as long as it does not threaten the entrepreneurial economic system, as long as it doesn't threaten the free circulation of capital, as long as it doesn't threaten the exploitation of faraway lands through colonialism and imperialism, as long as it doesn't stop the domestication of nature, as long as it doesn't make people question the system, circulation is free. Quote, in that area, people can still make their way, provided that they do not look too closely at their true purpose and are willing to be compliant. So in this area of free circulation, we arrive at a double bind where the system itself becomes resistance. In other words, if you want to be free, you must comply with the system. So this means that the system takes on the mantle of the protector of your freedom, right? like with the concept of enlightenment, in which, enlightenment dresses itself as what is standing between servitude and freedom, between barbarity and civilization, liberalism is going to stand between the moralizing religious elites, with their fantasies about, elitist style and stuff, and your free movements. And as such, you have no other choice but to accept liberalism as soon as, you have to accept liberalism and find that the culture produced by the culture industry, is actually your only option. You end up having to accept that there has to be capitalists and an economic elite that must domesticate nature and people, because it is thanks to them that you can enjoy some freedom. Like, they are the true resistant, they are the true, dissidents against, the old elites. So people end up having to rely on those who export capital, those who control technology, and those who exploit the land in order to be free. So it's basically, the poor having to rely on the rich. So the act of resistance becomes the means for conservation, for the system to preserve itself, since, the capitalists, the exploiters are presented as being the true rebels here, the ones who actually, conserve our freedom. Quote, anyone who resists can survive only by being incorporated. Once registered as diverging from the culture industry, they belong to it as the land reformer does to capitalism. So in other words, the system praises resistance and freedom, it rewards it, but only in its own framework. Those who truly resist, those who truly rebel, only do so if their resistance can make profit, if their resistance can be sold for millions of dollars. So you resist by creating more capital, the thing that, creates more oppression. When you feel indignation by the plight of workers, that indignation must result in more liberalism. Same thing when it is indignation by the plight of certain ethnic populations, or by the fate of women in sexist societies, of victims of colonialism, of genocides and wars, or sexual minorities, whatever. All of these indignations must only result in a million dollar idea to sell. So whenever people complain, they are symbolized by Adorno and Horkheimer as rebels suing for peace. But they are rebels under the protection of the same authority figure, here capital, that must be, discerned by our ears when we hear their complaint. So basically, it's the economy, the same that is causing indignation and complaints, that must be the savior of those indignations and complaints. So the system hurts you, but you can only rely on that system, on that same system, in order to be saved. So it's like, they give this they give this image that that represent this paradox perfectly. They write, the more immeasurable the gulf between chorus and leaders, the more certainly is there a place among the latter for anyone who demonstrates superiority by well-organized dissidence. So a chorus is a group of singers. They usually have a leader, a chorus leader, and that is basically the organizer of the chorus. In liberalism, the leaders are seen as rebels, like how dictators are often presenting themselves as individuals who don't bow to the establishment, right? Fascist dictators are always talking about, they're always talking in the name of freedom, individuality, uniqueness, etc. They paradoxically present themselves as the dissidents, and they only suppress other dissidents because it's a competition among themselves. Since liberalism is about competition of markets, which is inevitable with the free circulation of capital, the leaders must compete among themselves as well. They must each prove to be superior to other leaders, and so this superiority comes in the form of accumulated capital, which ultimately means that as leaders accumulate capital, the choruses lose more and more of their capital. So for the leader to be able to compete with others, to compete with other leaders, the inequalities between them and their choruses must be incredibly high. So the more immeasurable the inequality between them is, the more likely leaders will prove how powerful they are by organizing that chorus. They organize the dissidents. So the leaders will actually, be the ones deciding which dissidents is more efficient than others. Okay, so they will prove, the leader will prove its superiority to others by proving that he knows better than the chorus to how to organize their dissidents. Like when a group of people want to advance their social rights and interests, they are confronted with reformists who tell them that this is not how you change society, that you need to play by the game of the system, for example, that maybe it's too early for such radical changes, etc. It's the same old tale of, these indigenous don't know how to govern themselves, so we will do it for them. Or, the people here aren't ready for democracy, so we must organize them. We will organize them in the right way so that they can be ready for democracy. So it ends up with a bunch of leaders deciding on everything that the chorus must do. They become their representatives, as in bourgeois representative democracies, and where the representatives only serve their own interests, right? And the chorus can only emancipate themselves through the same system that keeps producing these leaders. And so, in short, liberalism only frees those it deems sufficient enough to strengthen the economic system. The ablest members of society, those who have capital, who know how to use it in order to make more capital, those who own the technology to submit the earth and people of foreign lands. And it is this philosophy of enabling the ablest, of empowering the powerful, and disabling the disabled, and disempowering the disenfranchised, that the culture industry maintains and reinforces. Quote, in this way, liberalism's tendency to give free rein to its ablest members survives in the culture industry. Now, the point of liberalism is to, in theory, it is to allow ideas to be free. Authority that was embodied in religious figures and royalty were criticized as making people stupid on purpose and limiting, the potential of great minds. Someone can have a great idea that can serve the purpose of humanity, but kings and priests would use their authority to make sure that idea can never reach an audience. So, censorship was the prime target of liberalism, which argued that limiting, the action of clever people in itself is not a very good idea. So liberalism needs the idea of the clever people to be spread as wide as possible, to reach the further reaches of the globe. So markets are the tools for this spreading of ideas. Whether the regulated markets or the free markets doesn't really matter here. The purpose of the market is, in theory, to spread the ideas of clever people. But the freedom that liberalism championed has a dark side. It now means that it is cleverness that guarantees survival. Since freedom in liberalism is a negative freedom, meaning that there is no entity that can impose itself on your choices, no religious or government authority, again, in theory, as long as you're not directly harming anyone, your survival now depends only on yourself. Like no one is actively trying to stop you from living, so you have no excuses anymore if you are not successful, if you are not enjoying your freedom. So the liberation that comes with scientific knowledge that Bacon championed, again, see the concept of enlightenment, it means that now surviving depends on nothing else but your physical strength or your intelligence. Liberalism basically is the survival of the fittest, and therefore if you are starving, it's out of your own free choice, out of your own stupidity. So no one hindered your freedom besides yourself, so there is no reason for you to complain. Hence, quote, to open that industry to clever people is the function of the otherwise largely regulated market, in which even in its heyday, freedom was the freedom of the stupid to starve in art as elsewhere. So indeed, it is only the clever who should have access to the industry. They're the ones we want to be in charge, right? The ones who are clever. It is their ideas that can save us. It is their way of planning the economy. It is their intelligence that allows us to have electricity and Wi-Fi. So whomever doesn't play with the rules of liberalism must be stupid, and it is their freedom to starve. If someone chooses to pursue a career in art, if they didn't apply themselves to an art that is approved by the laws of liberalism, then they are stupid, and so it is their own choices to fail and starve. So the culture industry, therefore, is about the production of an art that simply reinforces the economic system in place. And it's no coincidence that the origins of the culture industry is the sphere of liberalism. In the area where it is all business, there is actually little room for difference. Everything must be modeled on sameness. Everything must follow the same process of production over and over again. Hence the homogeneity of culture that is produced by different countries. Nowadays, and since the times of Adorno and Horkheimer, everything was being modeled on the American way of life, because America is the place in which liberalism entered its most progressive phases, the phases of, unlimited capital growth. So whether you watch a movie in France or Spain or Italy, whether you read a magazine in the UK or in Norway, you are consuming an American item. The cinema, the theaters and distribution companies, the publishing houses all over the world have entered the international market to propose the same thing as their biggest competitors. They are proposing a variety that is only superficial as a way to distinguish themselves from their competitors. They give, for example, the example of Gaumont and Pathé for the French, and Hundberg and Ullstein for the German. It's an example of distribution and publishing companies that went into the international market because it's in their advantage to model themselves on the American cultural system. Since after the war, people became reliant on the United States, the Second World War. They became reliant on the US economically. Europe needed to rebuild and rebuild itself, and they had to turn to the US for that. Plus, it was a time of inflation, and there was, a need for relaunching the competitivity of Europe. So everything had to turn into a power source for the economy. Every aspect of human life had to be useful. Everyone had to become the clever entrepreneur if they didn't want to starve like stupid people. Hence, the culture industry needs to convert more and more potential into the economy. Everything must go forward towards more progress, more energy, more creativity, more innovation, etc. So whenever you hear your teachers complain that, culturally speaking, everything is going backward, and then urge you to be creative and innovative, to be autonomous, using the same language of entrepreneurs, they didn't understand how the culture industry is working. For many critics of the current culture, they think that culture is stuck, that the world is advancing too fast thanks to technology, but culture isn't following, and because of that, all that is produced at the level of culture is just mind-numbing or barbaric. In other words, your literature teacher is complaining that people are watching sitcoms instead of reading Shakespeare. They are waiting for someone to be the Shakespeare of the 21st century, so they are urging students to be creative because they hope that high culture will catch up to the advances in science and technology and not be, confined to the mediocre production of Hollywood and Netflix, or to garbage literature like 50 Shades of Grey. So they have, according to Adorno and Horkheimer, a belief that the barbarism of the culture industry is a result of culture lag, of the backwardness of American consciousness in relation to the state of technology. So there's a belief that the reason why the culture industry is a thing at all is due to a cultural lag. We have Netflix because we don't have the new Shakespeare. We have in Tunisia Shuf Li Hal and Ouled Mufida because there is no Ibn Khaldun or Abu Qasim al-Shaybi of the 21st century. And to stay in the context of Tunisia, we believe that everyone consumes American pop culture because we're not providing the population of a high Tunisian culture. Like you have a world that is going ahead technologically speaking, but we are stuck culturally. We are lagging behind. So technology is moving forward while culture and consciousness, and whether American or Tunisian, doesn't matter, culture and consciousness is moving backward. But as Adorno and Horkheimer insist, they insist on this relationship between the backwardness of consciousness and the progress of technology. They insist on this cultural lag, and they say that it is an illusion. Like the desire for teachers and critics to have the 21st century Shakespeare and Ibn Khaldun is precisely what drives the culture industry. It's not that culture is going backward, but rather that it is going forward that is creating the culture industry. If culture tries to keep up with technology, with markets, with liberalism, then it becomes the culture industry. Like what you are seeing is actually, you know, culture catching up. You cannot, you can't on the one hand want a solution to the culture industry while wanting culture to be dynamic like a market is dynamic. You cannot tell people be creative, hoping that they will become the next Shakespeare, while they live in a world in which, you know, the stupid is free to starve to death. That's actually how you move from liberalism to fascism. After all, this rhetoric of the decadence of culture in relation to a world that is progressing too quickly in terms of technology, that's the signature. That's the signature move of fascist ideology. Like fascist leaders deprive, they complain about, you know, they complain of the state of culture in their time. They always urge for a new and great form of art modeled on technology, on dynamism, on vitality, on novelty, on creativity. They all want a culture that mimics the spirit of the old great minds, but that would be in sync with technological progress. But that means that culture must have the entrepreneurial mindset, which is precisely what the culture industry is. So the culture industry is what your teachers who complain that culture is becoming barbaric, that's what they are wishing for. The culture industry is what, you know, your teacher is wishing for when he tells you, you know, to be creative and innovative. Sorry. So, as Adorno and Horkheimer say, what made fascism difficult to install in pre-fascist societies was precisely that culture was always backward in relation to technology and not in sync with it. It was precisely this backwardness of culture that made culture great, that guaranteed the autonomy of culture. They write pre-fascist Europe was backward in relation to the monopoly of culture, but it was precisely to such backwardness that intellectual activity owed a remnant of autonomy, its last exponents their livelihood, however meager. So basically, they argue that because intellectual activity didn't have to be integrated within the economic apparatus, because of that it maintained some autonomy and freedom. The mind could wander into the territories that Enlightenment denounced as superstition. Education and culture, for example, were not obsessed with the idea of self-preservation, which we discussed in the concept of Enlightenment. It wasn't only about, you know, subjugating and domesticating nature, but also activities that were cut off from markets. The ivory towers, for example, that philosophers of the Enlightenment and liberalism condemned, as well as, you know, wells of stupidity and superstition, were actually places in which imagination and autonomy had their spaces, you know, however small. It was still bigger than non-existence in the culture industry. They take, Adorno and Horkheimer, they take the example of Germany before its industrialization, and they argue that from the Middle Ages to the 19th century, cultural production was the responsibility of educational systems such as universities, theaters, orchestras, and museums, and these were under patronage. So the patrons were who were princes and feudal lords in the Middle Ages. Then it moved to local authorities, all the way to even the state. These patrons assured that the institutions we just mentioned, universities, theaters, museums, these institutions would always enjoy a certain degree of independence from the market mechanisms. They at least, you know, privileged culture as a means of emancipation rather than a means for more capital growth, right? Think about national education. Now, it is true that national education has a lot of problems. Public education, maybe that would be more correct. I mean, public education, yeah, sure, it has a lot of problems, but it does have some benefits. Have you ever heard people complain that schools never teach us about practical things, like how to start a business and make money, how to be an entrepreneur, but instead, schools make us read Shakespeare? Well, the reason why public education focuses on Shakespeare more than how Steve Jobs did, how Steve Jobs made it, is because it is a residue of what Adorno and Horkheimer talks about here. It's a resistance to market mechanisms. It holds that people are more than just, economic creatures, and that they need an education in order to be really free, to have autonomous minds, to work on their imagination, to cultivate their character, to be complete and autonomous, and especially critical individuals. That is why it is often called a liberal education, by the way. You learn the great minds in order to be liberated from the homogenizing demands of progress. That's why you read Shakespeare. This doesn't mean that the patrons who protect the arts were not thinking in terms of their own interests. Of course, the state through public education is also about control, but these patrons, they did recognize something important to be preserved about art and about metaphysics, even if those patrons were ideologically driven and most more, and most were more sympathetic to liberalism. They still recognize that there is something valuable in culture that we cannot just hand over to the market. They certainly hope that the protection they gave to art and philosophy would also allow them to control this independent value of market, and when it crashed with their economic interest, they can manage a balance. But this value soon turns this value goes beyond the limits of their protection, and that it even claims some independence from the patrons. Intellectual autonomy won't stay put simply because you are offering it a protection against the market. As Adorno and Horkheimer writes about the protection of patrons, this stifled the backbone of art in its late phase against the verdict of supply and demand, heightening its resistance far beyond its actual degree of protection. So what this means is that the intellectual activities under the protection of patrons actually undermined the power of such patrons. In former times, they signed their letters like Kant and Hume, your most obedient servant, while undermining the foundations of throne and altar. So not only it undermined the power of, throne and altar, of king and priests, of, patrons, but the relation between them, between, the philosophers and artists and their patron, had always some independence from the market. Its only relation was purchasing power. Purchasing power meaning like money to in order to support myself. Like the patron gives money to support the artist or the author for them to produce whatever they produce, whatever books, whatever paintings, whatever. The non-marketable values and artistic or intellectual qualities of their work was paid for as purchasing power. This was the sign of independence of universities, for example, like universities that are public and are paid by the government, but normally the government cannot dictate what is being produced in universities. Normally. It's the government that decide what is being taught, but when it comes to research, the government cannot tell you that this subject doesn't interest me or something. Government has to support researchers. That's how it is. Or at least that's how it should be. So this reminds of when how parents parents who complain that they are giving tax money for schools to teach their kids things that the parents don't approve of. Normally we don't really give a shit of what the parents want their kids to learn, because parents aren't known in history for being good at knowing what is best for future citizens to know. An evangelist parent, for example, who'd sue public schools because they are teaching evolution, or when white racist parents made protests so that public schools don't let black kids in back in the 50s, and then, you know, go put them in private schools, schools that rely on market mechanisms, and in which, you know, parents can teach what they want their children to know. So yeah, so it's basically ideology masqueraded as protection against ideology. So the point is, when it comes to knowledge, it has primacy over the person, the person's preferences, or whomever funds it, or at least that's how it's supposed to be on paper. So it doesn't matter if an artist or a philosopher produces something that you, as a patron, don't know how you are going to make a profit off of it. Like, you support the dude no matter what, and that's it. You know, if when you are a patron, you just, you know, give Kant and Hume their purchasing power, and you just zip it whatever it is that they are going to write about. They can be criticizing you. You have to pay for that shit. So intellectual activity doesn't have to be aligned with the personal desires and interests, and certainly not the interests of the market. And this made a relationship of specific reciprocity and respect between the author and the patron. When the author refers to himself as the obedient servant of the patron didn't have as much power over the author as when markets have finally invaded the cultural sphere. When artists became aesthetic experts, meaning people who have expertise in aesthetics, art lost its protection. Quote, only the dire and incessant threat of incorporation into commercial life as aesthetic experts finally brought the artists to heel. So, because once the artist becomes an expert, he becomes marketable, because now art has no longer its ambivalent status. Like we said, art is like magic. It defies expertise. There's always an aura of mystery surrounding it. There's always some indeterminacy. When we look at a piece of art, there's always an uncanny feeling to it, because it's like, you know, advancing into the great unknown. You can understand this when you think of the producer who doesn't want to take risks with a movie. If the movie is too artistic, the producer doesn't know if it will generate profit, if it will make enough entries in a short amount of time to the box office. He needs the movie to be confined to a set of rules established by the experts in order to trust that the movie will be successful. A producer doesn't take chances, if you want. He doesn't say art can take a long time to be powerful, to earn its public, to become a classic, if you will. The producer needs to know that the movie will work right away. It is never the knowledge that the movie won't work that stops them from producing it. It's rather the indeterminacy of the movie that's enough to make them go, I won't produce this shit. So when the patron didn't require to know that the art is the product of expertise, both artists and patrons had their own respective spheres, and both respected each other's privacy. The ignorance of the patron allowed for both parties to coexist in peace and mutual respect. The patron didn't try to invade the word of the artist, to make it apparent, or to comprehend, to make the art comprehensible from the standpoint of his own economic interests. He didn't have, the patron didn't have that pretension. But once the artist became an expert, there is no mystery anymore. There is no reason why the patron doesn't invade the privacy of the artist. The studio of the painter is no longer a magical site. It was completely disenchanted, and therefore the artist has nothing to hide anymore. He's no longer an artist, but simply a technician, someone who computes his craft, who can subject it to mathematical formula, to economic equations. And so from here on, both artist and patron can only have the same interests. They can only think alike, look at the world in the same way through the lenses of the market. And so since art is about expertise, there is no mystery shielding it from the laws of the market. Like any other thing on the market that answers to the law of supply and demand, art and philosophy are no exception. And so the artist is no longer the servant of the patron, but this doesn't mean that the artist is now free or is the equal of the patron. He already was, even his superior in some sense. But Adorno and Horkheimer write, today they call heads of government by their first names and are subject in every artistic impulse to the judgment of their illiterate principles. So there is a pseudo-equality between, you know, the artist and the patron today with the culture industry. And this pseudo-equality only now means that the artist and heads of states, producers, gallery owners, all of them must think alike. Both must play by the same rules of liberalism. The artist has now no right for support from his patron. If he doesn't submit to the same rules of liberalism, he starves. He becomes a stranger, someone to whom nothing is owed. By his own choice, own choice, of course, he led himself to this situation. Nothing is compelling, you know, nothing is compelling the artist to keep doing an art that doesn't earn him a living. He can avoid starvation by doing what the market demands of him. So the artist is the stupid who is free to starve. And Adorno and Horkheimer quote from the philosopher and sociologist Alexis de Tocqueville, who in 1864 in his famous Democracy in America writes, under the private monopoly of culture, tyranny does indeed leave the body free and sets to work directly on the soul. The ruler no longer says, either you think as I do or you die. He says, you are free not to think as I do. Your life, your property, all that you shall keep, but from this day on you will be a stranger among us. So the artists or the philosophers who don't conform to the demands of the market, to the laws of supply and demand, they become the loner eccentric, the one who has no power to, you know, to create, to produce his ideas or spread his ideas anymore, because he's reduced to economic impotence. Quote, anyone who does not conform is condemned to an economic impotence, which is prolonged in the intellectual powerlessness of the eccentric loner. Disconnected from the mainstream, he is easily convicted of inadequacy. So now that the power of the artist and the intellect have been, you know, grabbed by the balls, as they say, their power is made insignificant, since their only way to have an impact on society is by playing by the rules of the markets. For a philosopher to spread his ideas or an artist to make his art, he needs money to sustain himself and to publish or produce his art, to distribute it, etc. And so this would require that you do something that either sells or have an activity that can, you know, sustain you beside your intellectual or artistic activity. But if you can live from that activity, it means that it confirms the very same system that the activity rejects by its own nature. And if you have a side hustle to sustain yourself, it proves that the activity is less serious than the hustle and therefore less valuable. So in both ways, you just make the point of liberalism and the culture industry, you know, and this is its strategy. It makes it so that even those who resist must be compliant just to be able to resist. It has therefore the need to spread the myth of material success as the only viable model of existence. Everyone must believe in the validity of this blackmail, especially the masses. The rulers can therefore isolate the artist and the philosopher from all support once they make him vulnerable economically. And so the rulers withdraw their support, but they also need to make sure that the masses too withdraw their support from the artist. So the masses too must, when they look at the intellectual or the artist, they must first judge his worth based on his economic success. And so this makes philosophy and art even more inoffensive, because now you deprive them not only of their educational purposes, but also their revolutionary power. Workers urge their children, for example, to waste no time with the humanities, but to always think in terms of jobs. Education becomes not a means for cultivating the mind or critical thinking about society and nourishing, you know, revolutionary sentiment, but a means for social ascension, a ladder to material success as defined by liberalism. So the working class therefore becomes even more distrustful towards the philosopher and the artist. than the elite and believe even more in the myth of material success through hard work. They believe in this shit more than the rulers. Quote, just as the ruled have always taken the morality dispensed to them by just as the ruled have always taken the morality dispensed to them by the rulers more seriously than the rulers themselves, the defrauded masses today cling to the myth of success still more ardently than the successful. They too have their aspirations. They insist unwaveringly on the ideology by which they are enslaved. So the masses, being themselves more desperate and more vulnerable economically, they are more likely to succumb to this blackmail, like slaves who rely on their masters to survive, or the prostitute that relies on her pimp just to feed herself. The rulers have taken away all powers, all forms of power from the ruled, all forms of power that the ruled could have, and kept it for themselves only. And so once it's done, the masses will be even more ferocious towards themselves than the rulers, even than the rulers ever were ferocious with the masses. So the common people, as the authors note, have a pernicious love for the ideology that enslaves them, that outstrips the cunning of the rulers. Like, you know, our subjugation is more the result of our own dumbness than the cleverness of the rulers. Like, the rulers don't even have to plan anything, but they just let the market do its thing and people will comply automatically. They will work like cogs in a machine towards their own alienation, their own subjugation, and they will even love it. The masses will censor themselves to greater extent than the Hayes office. Adorno and Horkheimer, they mention the Hay offices, which is a reference to the Hayes Code. The Hayes Code is a code for censorship that was established in the U.S. from 1934 to 68, and it was in movies. Like, you cannot show anything sexual on screen, no drugs or drinking. You cannot portray the law or the police as bad, no gambling, no profanity, etc. And so the masses, they argue, have a love towards self-censorship that's almost seen as virtuous. Like, it gives them, like, self-censorship gives a boner to the masses, because, you know, through self-censorship, they think that they are being virtuous. It's like they love getting punished, to have their own agency taken away from them, like the way we put faith in tribunals to see people punished by stronger, rigid, and strict judges. That kind of arouses us, like the power of the state arouses us. And so there is a strange parallelism that the authors point at between sexual arousal and a negation of sex and pleasure. Like, the masses, he says, are more attracted to Mickey Rooney than to Greta Garbo, to Donald Duck than to Betty Boop. So Rooney was an American actor that was extremely popular during the 30s and 40s. He was known for his cheerful characters, whereas Gardo was an actress that is known for her melancholic, lonely and depressed characters. So while the two are famous and icons in cinema, Adorno and Horkheimer suggest that the masses are inclined towards cheerfulness, but then that cheerfulness is equated with Donald Duck, the character from Walt Disney, who's a blue-collar working-class duck and has the worst possible life ever. And so this is giving priority over Betty Boop. That's another cartoon character famous for being a cartoon sex symbol. Like, you know, she was like the first Jessica Rabbit. So the cheerfulness of Rooney is equated with the masochism of Donald Duck, while the sexuality of Betty Boop is to be associated with the melancholy of, you know, of the tragic Gardo. Betty Boop and many actresses like Gardo had their, you know, shares of battles with the Hayes Code. It's worth noting that Adorno and Horkheimer aren't really anti-pop culture or cinema. They're not into they're not saying that you shouldn't, you know, watch cartoons or stuff like that. I mean, Adorno was actually into Betty Boop, but he sees that these characters, with the arrival of the code, were being transformed into more acceptable frames, you know, kind of like Disney had to make everything cute in order to appeal to wider audiences, mostly kids. Because at first cartoons weren't for kids, they were for adults. They were sexualized and you had a lot of violence going on in them, and you had hardcore prejudices. That's a subject for another time, I think. But the point is, even in pop culture, you have things that more or less resist the culture industry or the laws of the market. The point is to find every blind spot in the industry and make sure that it doesn't have any potential for revolutionary purposes, like the melancholy of Gardo and the sex appeal of Betty Boop. That reminds of the flappers of the Roaring Twenties. Those are more problematic, more taboo than the cheerfulness of a Rooney and the masochism of a Donald Duck. So the latter are more family friendly, more conservative than women being sexual or wanting to be left alone, right? So Garbo and Boop are closer to the sirens, whereas Rooney and Donald Duck are closer to Odysseus, if you want. As such, the culture industry needs the latter to be favored over the former, and so it rigged. So the culture industry basically rigged the game. The industry bows to the vote it has itself rigged. So the rulers, they know that through their invisible blackmail, the masses will favor Rooney and Donald Duck. The economy will favor the option that the rulers favor and claim that it's all fair because it's all the choice of the customer. Like the rulers know they have nothing to fear because the laws of the market protect them from any insurrection or revolution. They know through the market, the common people will not appeal to the higher culture, or when the artist and the philosopher still lived in their own sphere, but to the culture industry. They will not appeal either to whatever gives them pleasure, you know. As with Odysseus, the lotus eaters must be avoided, like sexuality must be repressed. The solitude of Gardo and the sexuality of Boop mustn't come into contact with women. They should consume things that teaches them about, you know, housewife life, where their sexuality is denied, along with an educated mind. Like when men, when they know that women aren't educated, don't have reason to fear them. You know the joke, you know, what do men fear? An educated woman. So wives must be stay at home when they are done with their chores, which are, you know, done quickly with the arrival of the washing machine and the vacuum cleaner. They must stay inside watching TV and reading fashion magazines to cope with the boredom. So television and radios will provide only that kind of content, but then would say that no one is obliging those women to consume those programs. It's the market, it's the choice of those women. If producers start making programs about feminism, they will lose profit, and so that's why they just, you know, make conservative stuff, at least in that era. It's the famous, you know, go woke, go broke motto, which is part of the same system that produces the woke programs that are profit oriented. So both the snowflakes at Netflix and the snowflakes on the Daily Wire are part of the same system designed to break any social justice, progress, or revolutionary potential. So Netflix hijacks social movements and turns them into marketable brands, forcing them to conform to liberalism and to confirm that liberalism is the only way for those social movements to exist. Like you want to fight systemic racism, you must do it while producing more capital. You want to fight the patriarchy and heteronormativity, you must do so while making a profit. And so if the movie bombs at the box office, conservatives are like, see, we told you it's trash, and whether it bombs or is successful doesn't matter. The culture industry wins either way. Garbo and Betty Boop are also products of the culture industry. They may have some revolutionary potential, but that potential is captured by the industry. The fact that they won't appeal as much as Rooney and Donald Duck is part of the business strategy. The cost, or the box office bomb, is a strength to the industry. Quote, in the incidental costs to the firm, which cannot turn a profit from its contract with a declining star, are legitimate costs for the system as a whole. By artfully sanctioning the demand for trash, the system inaugurates total harmony. So the word sanctioning is important here. It means both to allow and to punish. The word in German is Sanktionierung. I'm not sure of the pronunciation again, and that can mean both, and I'm not sure in which sense the authors are using it here, but both make sense, and each can refer to the other, like, we punish by allowing and we allow by punishing. Like sanctioning the demand for trash means that we allow the demand for trash. We make sure that the housewife demands the trash she consumes, and that keeps her alienated in the name of punishing trash. Like the play between Netflix and the Daily Wire. The Daily Wire punishes the trash of Netflix and Hollywood only to allow their own trash. Like, your teacher who punishes the trash that the economic system produces only to tell you to be creative and innovative by the same standards of the economic system. Teachers complain about trash while telling you to produce trash. So both are actually trash, and you are made to want that trash. Like in pornography, we sanction in the sense of allowing it, while at the same time we sanction like we punish sexual desires. You have a growing industry worth billions of dollars practicing what society at large considers taboo, or as the example that Adorno and Horkheimer uses, expertise and connoisseurship. He writes, connoisseurship and expertise are proscribed as the arrogance of those who think themselves superior, whereas culture distributes its privileges democratically to all. So expertise is sanctioned as in punished. It is a sign of arrogance, but at the same time it is allowed since everyone thinks that they are experts and superior to others. It's the kind of situation in which everyone thinks that a certain virtue is valuable, but everyone who thinks that they are everyone who thinks that they are the only one or among a few that actually practices that virtue. In the end, all that can be demanded is trash. The consumer is aware that what they consume is trash. They must see trash everywhere and revolt against it, only so that the industry produces more trash. So Netflix's portrayal of the working class, of ethnic and gender minorities is trash, and the culture industry knows it and wants the consumer to know it, so that it can produce the trash of the Daily Wire, which in its time will become the new trash, only to replace it with another trash, etc., etc., etc. So hence you maintain the illusion that things are changing, that there is novelty, that there is innovation and creativity through the bad consciousness of the consumer. The consumer feels bad that he consumes trash, he complains, and the industry provides another trash instead. Hence the harmony of trash is maintained, and conformity and sameness prevail. So from the myth of success, we have the myth of creativity. So the culture industry is, as you must have understood by now, all about conservatism. Its progressivism is just about reproducing the same over and over again. There is nothing new in the progress that the Enlightenment has brought. It is, in this sense, that it is mass deception. There is a rotating machine that produces things, but while you think that the machine is going ahead, like progressing, Adorno and Horkheimer say, the machine is rotating on the spot. While it already determines consumption, it rejects anything untried as a risk. So again, this is the talk of novelty, but only novelty on the surface. Novelty means adapting something old into a new medium. Adapting novels into movies, like we said, and only bestsellers, and then admire the boldness and the courage of the producers and directors for having tried something that was never tried before. So the status quo is therefore maintained through endless movement, because we adapt more and more novels into movies, because literary words on paper turn into images and then into moving images. We have the impression that things are changing. By being amazed by these movements, we feel indeed that things are not static, like housewives who gossip and don't want to be spoiled the next episode of, won't they keep themselves amused to forget their boredom. There's a new anecdote, a new story, a new 19th plot twist, a new character in the show, and suddenly things seem to be moving again. So amusement is limited to only seeing the same item of the same catalog but with different features or different colors. Each item is but a reproduction of an eternal idea. Only a few ideas are available, not enough for choice to have any meaning, but the culture industry tells you that the choice is in how you want that idea to be flavored. We all eat the same ice cream, but at least we have an endless choice of flavor. So as long as we are convinced that there is only ice cream, we are free to choose all the flavors that we want. Quote, "It is as if some omnipresent agency had reviewed the material and issued an authoritative catalog tersely listing the products available." So the agency he has in mind is something like the Rockefeller Institute and Radio City, a part of the Rockefeller Center in New York, containing several theaters, radio studios, and the Radio City Music Hall. It's like, you know, Disney, for example, building a monopole about film production. Netflix, DreamWorks, 20th Century, Universal, etc. Like the culture industry is pretty idealistic. You know, it is platonically idealist. Plato was an idealist since he believed that the reality of the world exists as abstract ideas. All the glasses that you these glasses that you see and touch, you drink from, these are all illusions. There's only one glass, the perfect glass, that all glasses in the world are just, you know, copies of. The perfect glass is literally an ideal glass. It exists as an idea of the glass. So each thing that you see is actually a copy of its ideal form, its idea. When we see different trees, different cats, different cars, tables and chairs, in reality there is only one of each, and all of the others are imitating those unique singular ideas. So these ideas exist in a limited number. They cannot change, they cannot increase or decrease. Nothing new can be added to the world of ideas of Plato. It's total, it's harmonic, it's static, eternal, never changing, perfect, and everything that is produced is therefore confined to these ideas, no matter how far they are from one another. So through amusement and entertainment, the culture industry boasts of having, you know, reached Plato's ideal. Plato would certainly be horrified by the culture industry and would see the industry as nothing but pure appearances. Probably he'll be like, this is as far as we can be from the world of forms, since, you know, for Plato, entertainment is precisely what keeps us away from reaching the forms. But the culture industry reaches the forms with entertainment. Because of the crumbling of distinction between high and low culture, the culture industry can synthesize all forms of cultural expressions into a harmonious static whole. Think about this. People often complain that high culture, classical literature, or classical philosophy is boring. Who has time to read an entire book of philosophy or listen to entire opera by Mozart? Teachers in classrooms can confirm this when they are confronted with a room full of bored students. They get the urge of having to make Shakespeare entertaining for the students to start, you know, give a damn about Shakespeare. So vulgarizing videos on YouTube must be short, edgy. You need to have cuts every 5 seconds. It has to be straight to the point, and philosophy must be entertaining before being philosophy. Art must be entertaining before being art. Mozart has to be pop music before being Mozart. And so teachers are forced to do this because they are like workers on an assembly line. They have to finish the program as soon as possible, like a worker has an amount to assemble in a given time. Students too are in a hurry, and this must lead to a job eventually. It's all for the sake of the economy. The teacher must find innovative and efficient ways to assemble the parts as quickly as possible, with the boss demanding more and more productivity. So the only way out is to make education entertaining. The classroom must turn into a casino in which students can have an opportunity to listen to Beethoven, to Wagner, or to Mozart. Despite the fact that a casino isn't the right place for classical music, right? So it's not that casino cannot exist or cannot have music. It's more about preventing everything to turn into entertainment in order for us to give a damn about it, or to give it the attention that it deserves. So high culture is made for a different purpose than, for example, jazz or electro music. One is to educate, the other is to entertain. And so both spheres are respectable, like the patron and the artist. It is important to entertain ourselves, but not at the expense of education. Classical music should be listened to in a certain way because it has things to tell us. If you play it at a casino or at a nightclub, chances are people are going to miss on its value and perhaps message. So it's like you want to have a conversation about something deep and too personal at a bar where the music is blasting and the people are shouting, when in reality you need a place that is intimate, calm, without way too many stimuli. You won't be comfortable knowing that whatever it is you have to say, given how important it is, has to be entertaining for the other person to give a damn about it and listen to you. So if I'm going to open up about a past trauma, for example, and I have to make it entertaining in order for you to listen, well, you are probably a dick. And even if I make it entertaining, the fact that it is entertaining probably means that you missed the entire point of my traumatic story, right? And didn't actually listen to it. So once these distinctions between high and low culture disappear thanks to amusement, the industry manages to realize the Platonic ideals. The word of ideas in Plato is like a sphere outside of which everything exists as a lie. All glasses are a lie. They are not a real glass, only the glass as idea exists. So what is beyond the sphere of ideas is just a reproduction of the truth in the sphere of ideas, but as a lie. So the culture industry does the same thing. Everything that exists outside its sphere, the truth of high art, for example, is destroyed. It is a lie. High art, like low art, are the lies of the same truth, which is the process of production in the culture industry. So Mozart and jazz or casino music are both music. They are made by the same process of the culture industry. So why should we then see Mozart as higher than jazz? So both are reproduced lies of the truth that is now under the monopole of the culture industry. Quote, its victory is twofold. What is destroyed as truth outside its sphere can be reproduced indefinitely within it as lies. So again here we have to explain something crucial in Adorno's thought regarding high and low art, or light and serious art. As we said, Adorno is often accused of being an elitist, in the sense that he deplores low art, which is, the product of the same masses he claims to want to emancipate. So Adorno is like championing the culture of the bourgeoisie, but this is a misunderstanding. It completely misunderstands his thought. He certainly maintains a distinction between light and serious art, but light art isn't a. It's not a decadence. He even says that those who have a disdain and contempt for light art are living in an illusion and didn't understand the culture industry. So if Adorno says that serious art is real art, then all art must be serious, and then we will have a Platonist view of ideas, Platonist view of art, meaning that you have an ideal art, and then light art would be its decadent, imperfect copy. Like he's not saying we should all read Shakespeare and no single mom should read 50 Shades of Grey. That's a misunderstanding of what he is saying. The distinction that he makes between high and low art from a bourgeois perspective corresponds to a dualism between the pure art and a praxis. Like on the one hand, there is an idealist version of an art that doesn't change, that is ahistorical, and on the other, the art of the masses, those who have their hands in the dirt. And so this ultimately leads to the vision that high art must stay away from praxis, and therefore it must stay away from the working class. So for the bourgeoisie, the working class will stain their Shakespeare and their Molière because they won't be able to understand them, and so they will butcher their Shakespeare and Molière. So classical education must not be about transforming the world, but about pure contemplation. So in short, high art serves the bourgeoisie when it is cut off from praxis, when it excludes the working class, when in reality art is for the working class, for the masses to use in order to break from their alienation. And this is what Adorno is actually saying. You know, he's not saying that art should be cut off from praxis on the it's the contrary. He's saying that high art should be involved in praxis. It should be involved in the working class. So it's not, you know, an elitist view to say that that says that the working class shouldn't bother with high art because they wouldn't understand it. So as they write, art keeps faith with the cause of that class, the working class, the true universal, precisely by freeing itself from the purposes of the false. The problem is that when serious art gets cut off from praxis, from the working class, then low art becomes the art of the masses. The oppressor keeps serious art to himself, while the oppressed gets the light art, simple amusement. But the oppressor's relationship to serious art gets affected by this separation. Like the ruling class even lose their authentic relationship with art. Remember that the culture industry thrive on entertainment, which means that light art becomes more realer than the serious art. Like it is often portrayed, working class people mock the seriousness of intellectuals. Philosophers and artists are often portrayed as living in the clouds, whereas the working man is living in the concrete. In reality, they know what matters in life because they live with their bellies. They think about, you know, hunger, thirst, shelter. Whenever you try to bring in critical philosophy to the masses, whenever you want them to think dialectically, they will respond with cynicism, like I worry about paying the bills and putting food on the table, and you want me to think about critical theory. Like, having reduced human beings to just Homo economicus, the rulers must approve of this. Keeping serious art away from the masses becomes a form of mercy. You know, it is by empathy that the movie producer says no to an elitist cinema. The masses won't understand that they shouldn't. Their lives are hard enough as it is. What we should produce is something to make them forget how difficult their lives are. So when they leave the factories and assembly lines, the ruled, according to the rulers, want entertainment. They want amusement. And the rulers are so kind for being ashamed of their serious art and offer light art as proof of their bad consciousness, right? Quote, serious art has denied itself to those for whom the hardship and oppression of life make a mockery of seriousness, and who must be glad to use the time not spent at the production line in being simply carried along. Light art has accompanied autonomous art as its shadow. It is the social bad conscious of serious art. So, serious art is laughed at even by the bourgeoisie that keeps it to itself and has brought light art to the same level as serious art. So the apotheosis of light art is presented as an act of kindness, as an act of humility. Why is jazz considered low art? Why jazz is not high art too? Only a reactionary would think like that, you know? Only a superstitious pseudo-intellectual would think that jazz is not equal to classical music, right? So light art therefore finds its justification on the ground that it is about self-preservation, that it is about the objective world, about the cynical, harsh reality, whereas serious art loses its appeal to truth. And so the triumph of the culture industry is the triumph of this sophism. Back in ancient Greece, sophism was basically the use of knowledge for personal interests and purposes. Sophists are intellectuals that don't care about the truth. They are ready to make the truth a lie and the lie a truth if it serves their own interests. And so the culture industry does the same. Serious art becomes idealism, while light art becomes realism. The jazz musician becomes closer to truth than Beethoven or Mozart. So serious art, which is outside the sphere of light art, as truth loses itself and becomes lies, whereas the lies that is light art becomes truth. They become the real model out of which everything else must flow and repeat. And so entertainment, amusement, that becomes the ideal, and the reduction of serious art to light art as well makes serious art an entertainment and nothing more. So the moment serious art says that it is more than entertainment, that it is not, whenever serious art says I am not a lie, I am not lies, it is ridiculed on the spot like entertainment ridiculed superstitions and myth. And so once serious art is ridiculed, it regains its status as just entertainment. Like that's what high art has to be, just entertainment. It has nothing more to say about reality, about emotions, about truth than any other form of light art. And so that provokes laughter. What provokes laughter is amusement. And thus, amusement is totalizing since it reaches the absolute synthesis between serious and light art. With amusement, light art elevates itself to the rank of serious art, while serious art falls to the rank of low art, of light art, low art, yes. So the high to the low and the low to the high. And so, in other words, amusement blurred the limits of the spheres between serious and light art, like it blurred the limits between the spheres of the artist and the patron. High art becomes identical to low art, like work becomes identical to leisure. And likewise, criticism of the low becomes criticism of the high as well. If you criticize the low art, if you criticize jazz, you also criticize Mozart and Beethoven. So Adorno and Horkheimer, they gave a few examples to illustrate this. He talks about the eccentricity of the circus, the peep show, or the brothel in relation to society is as embarrassing as it is that of Schoenberg and Karl Kraus. Now, I'm not really sure what the sentence actually means. When he says embarrassing to it, I'm not sure what the it refers to. Even in the German text, it's not clear. The sentence before is about the culture industry attempting to perform the synthesis between high and low. So maybe the it refers to the culture industry, or it is referring to society, like the eccentricity of the circus, the peep show, the brothel is embarrassing to the culture industry like it is embarrassing to society. But I think I'm going to go with the culture industry here. The it means the culture industry. So the eccentricity of the circus, and we will talk about the circus because Adorno has a few things to say about that. The subject of the sentence is the eccentricity, right? The eccentricity of the circus. So the culture industry is as embarrassed by the eccentricity of the circus, the peep show, those are pornographic shows, and brothels, because of their taboo nature, as it is of the eccentricity of Arnold Schoenberg and Karl Kraus. Now, Schoenberg was an Austrian-American composer, and Kraus was an Austrian writer, and I think Adorno refers to them here as illustration of high culture, like the eccentricity of both low and high culture are both an embarrassment to the culture industry, but that embarrassment keeps the machine spinning. I think it means that both of those who criticize the eccentricities of the high art are no different from the intellectuals criticizing the eccentricities of low art forms, right? I'm not really sure. There is something about everything being the same, Or is it related to Adorno's views on the circus? Like the circus can be considered a low form of art, but for Adorno, like with sexuality, it has the potential to create novelty. Like it's about, primal aesthetic images. When you watch a circus, it's like, burlesque or carnivalesque. Everything is mixed with everything, but like everything goes back into a primal state, which is just potential for actual novelty. But then for this idea of the circus to realize itself, it needs to be distinguished from the form of the circus that is just an illusion. Like there is a circus that really has revolutionary potential, and one that is just about reproducing the feeling or a simulacra of freedom. And once the distinction between the two is blurred, well, it's the latter that wins, the one about the illusion, about the simulacra. So the eccentricity of the circus stands in between two positions, that of the brothel or that of cross. And the culture industry, by equating both positions, makes the circus into nothing more than a brothel, a taboo to be embarrassed about, where it's all illusions of freedom, but there is no freedom whatsoever. And as I said, I'm not really sure about this, but yeah, the entertainment and amusement, which is kind of the first thing we think about when it comes to circuses, brothels and peep shows, they are used in a way to make everything the same. Maybe it will be clearer with the next example. He refers to Benny Goodman, a jazz musician who appeared in the Budapest String Quartet in 1938, and he recorded the clarinet quintet by Mozart, and that the quartet played like Guy Lombardo, another famous jazz musician of that time, known for his New Year's Eve broadcasted shows. Like he suggested that you have a mixture of music, classical and jazz, as if both are the same thing, as if you can, identify the one with the other, and so all spheres of existence are now invading one another, like all answering the same principle, which is self-preservation, meaning repetition. They say the irreconcilable elements of culture, art, and amusement have been subjected equally to the concept of purpose, and thus brought under a single false denominator, the totality of the culture industry. Its element is repetition. So works repeat itself in work. Work repeats itself in work, but also in our leisure time, and vice versa. So everything, repeats everything, I guess. And so we just come to think only in terms of stereotypes, the fact that you keep everything reproduces everything else. It means that you think just in terms of stereotypes. How the entertainment industry is all about producing stereotypes, because when we're entertained, we want to repeat that feeling, right? So what's better than stereotypes for that? A machine that produces stereotypes, that's what the culture industry is basically about. And it is through these stereotypes that the culture industry maintains its power over the consumers. Stereotypes create a world that is easy to apprehend because it is supposedly modeled on the needs of the customers, which are of course created by the social process. An individual goes through socialization, a process that teaches him what are the things that he must adopt, what behavior, tastes he must have in order to be integrated within society. And so the culture industry reproduces those, because its point is to challenge. Its point is not to challenge social tendencies, but to make profit over what's been already established. Whomever calls bullshit on this is met with cynicism, that this is the laws of the market which must survive at all costs. It's what people want to see, it's their needs and choices. So stereotypes are about confirming the unfounded opinions of people. They must possess certain items, look at other people in certain ways, etc. And so the rulers, quote, they are right to the extent that the power of the culture industry lies in its unity with fabricated need and not in simple antithesis to it. So the social process needs to be reproduced everywhere. You are told that you must buy a car in order to socialize because your social worth depends on your material possessions. So you work to get your car. Cars aren't just about their utility, but about prestige, their prestige, of course. And so that's a fabricated need. We work in order to produce more of those needs. The culture industry is here to remind us that everything that we do must be channeled into that goal, more fabricated needs. So entertainment is actually about work. Like we said, leisure and work are one and the same thing. So what we do in leisure, the entertainment we consume, is to reinforce the stereotypes for which we go to work. In leisure, we watch movies that reaffirm how much we need the latest smartphone. Quote, entertainment is the prolongation of work under late capitalism. It is sought by those who want to escape the mechanized labor process so that they can cope with it again. So leisure is basically used as a tool to recharge your batteries, or make sure that the batteries never run out, that people never actually catch a break from work, since a break from work means an obscure sphere, you know, something that you don't know what you are doing in there. What people do in their leisure time must be of no threat to the work process. And so entertainment is about keeping the mind busy, like the assembly line keeps the body busy. So the mind cannot have a second to itself. It must keep working, keep assembling the images thrown at it through the screen. So in the factory, you are told to assemble parts to make a toy, but in movies, you assemble images to make stereotypes. And so in both cases, it's the same activity. Nothing can make you forget the assembly line, not even leisure, not even entertainment. Quote, the only escape from work, from the work process in factory and office is through adaptation to it in leisure time. This is the incurable sickness of all entertainment. So when we are in leisure, we reproduce the same mechanisms at work. On the assembly line, the goal is to produce more in a shorter time, and so this forces the whole body to focus on just one activity at a time. One simple task is repeated over and over again, and the workers must keep up with the rising competitivity and productivity. And so this process lets no time for any other activity that the body wants to do. And so the same is true in leisure with the mind. The entertainment industry needs our cognitive faculties to be slim. Only one faculty is required. One task is asked for of the mind, doing associations, and that's how stereotypes are born, not through logical process of reason, but through passive association. An association is when you see two unrelated images, but your brain makes a connection between them. You can think of racial stereotypes as an example, like in that comedy routine by Peter Russell. He's a Canadian comedian, I think, who says that the media will show you like a picture of an Arab and then the picture of an explosion, and then it will be like, what do you think? And so the process happens automatically. Your brain actually works with associations, and it takes awareness and logical inquiry to break that process. But that takes a certain amount of time, while which the entertainment industry doesn't want you to have. The culture industry wants the brain to work on its own like a machine. So machinery is viewed as an entity that operates on instinct, on primacy. It follows a natural and certain process, and so thought disrupts that natural process. It questions it. So being a creature of instincts means to be a machine, and that is what the culture industry is counting on. It wants to prevent any opportunity for thought to manifest itself, and so films are a bombardment of images that happen so quickly that we cannot afford to think about what just happened, right? So once an image appears, another follows. Like on the assembly line, once a piece is assembled, a second one follows instantly with, a growing pace. And so, as the authors say, the spectator must need no thoughts of his own. The product prescribes each reaction, not through any actual coherence, which collapses once exposed to thought, but through signals. Any logical connection presupposing mental capacity is scrupulously avoided. So, since Enlightenment has put truth in the domain of immediacy, thought becomes a parasite, a defense mechanism. Thinking is now just a way to lie to oneself. Reality is what comes to your mind immediately, without logic or without thought, and so making immediate association is about making things that don't make any sense. And so the authors argue that association can still make sense, can still make some sense or coherence. A film has a plot that at least maintains some logical connection between the images and not just, random nonsense, but that too at one point has to be thrown away in the process of the culture industry. And so this is explicit in movies that throw plot twists over and over again at us. When you have a character development that makes sense, the writers break that development with a plot twist that they pulled from their butts, just to break, the ounce of meaning that you created so far. So only meaninglessness is acceptable, as the authors say, and they argue that while it can still have its legitimacy when in movies in which there is buffoonery or clowning, like in Charlie Chaplin's comedies or the Marx Brothers, in other mediums it's just meaninglessness gone wild. They refer to suspense movies, to cartoons and novelty songs, like hit songs with comedy elements. They write, the idea itself, like objects in comic and horror films, is massacred and mutilated. Novelty songs have always lived on contempt for meaning, which, as both ancestors and descendants of psychoanalysis, they reduce to the monotony of sexual symbolism. In crime and adventure films, the spectators are begrudged even the opportunity to witness the resolution. Even in non-ironic examples of the genre, they must make do with the mere horror of situations connected in only the most perfunctory way. So, it's no secret that these mediums, the thriller, the novelty song, and the cartoon, rely on psychological themes, where meaning is all gone. All meaninglessness and raw sexual energy with no purpose but itself become the norm. Those become the establishers of reality, and so reality is what the brain comes up with right on the spot. It's like truth is now the domain of the unconscious. The mechanical process of someone's brain is now taking to be their true nature or their true self. It's no wonder that often in psychological tests we want you to answer quickly without thinking, like an unconscious that is gone wild and given supremacy. That is, what the industry wants. That's the machine of the culture industry. An unconscious process that cannot reflect on what it is doing, that cannot be like, whoa, stop, wait a minute, what am I even doing here? To make meaning, to have a coherence that it is denied. The culture industry denies meaning and coherence, and it is denied by the same philosophy that championed rationality, coherence, logic, and objectivity. Now, the meaninglessness is the objective, while the logical is the subjective, the ideological, the unreliable. When someone tries to think critically, tries to make logical connections between the things that he perceives, that's the new superstition now. That's when you are subjective. Like with the unconscious, the only thing that matters is power in its raw nature. The use of technology isn't for transformative purposes like in magic, but to confirm that raw power. But like with low art, Adorno isn't criticizing film and cartoons blindly. Like, he recognizes their potential for emancipation, but like with sexuality, they become a tool for oppression. When they can be used like technology to stimulate imagination, as in, imagining other possible social social words, for example, different from the oppressive one we live in. They are instead of being used in that way, they are used to reinforce the world that we live in. Cartoon and stunt films were once exponents of fantasy against rationalism. They allowed justice to be done to the animals and things electrified by their technology by granting the mutilated beings a second life. Today they merely confirm the victory of technological reason over truth. So Adorno and Horkheimer are saying that originally cartoons and slapstick comedies were not meaningless. They weren't about preventing the spectator to form meaning. Rather, they were open windows to break from the meaninglessness of the world in order to think about other possibilities. So the fact that in cartoons and comedies things are over the top, that the laws of physics don't apply to cartoon characters, this was supposed to invite people to imagine worldviews not confined to the dominant ideologies. Comedies are about reconciliation, about the transcending of dead ends, about, restoring a forgotten order or bringing about a new one. So plots made sense because they all led to that final resolution, kind of like in Aristophanes' comedies. The comedies of Aristophanes are about ridiculing the present and at the same time bring in imagination to think about an alternative to this present. It's often done through carnivalesque tropes of mentioning, an ancient time of virtue that we forgot. In short, there is a temporal progression in cartoons, in comedies and stunt films that were leading to a resolution, a solution to the meaninglessness and chaos of the modern world, but that temporal progression is severed in the culture industry. Cultural production isn't about transforming the status quo. It's not about bringing something new and emancipating to society. Even when the past is evoked, it's without its revolutionary potential. For example, in racist productions where the racists feel that their society is crumbling because black people are freed from slavery, and so they appeal to the good old days where their racist stereotypes are still pretty much in place. Resolution is no longer possible in culture industry. Instead, you would have things like this, things like racial stereotypes. Since a resolution requires a break free from the oppressive current order, it requires that characters have agencies. In the old cartoons that Adorno is referring to, characters were in control of the plot and not the other way around. So the culture industry would favor, something like, what we just say about racist being nostalgic for the ancient, for the good old days, not the kind of not the kind of comedy that Aristophanes was doing, for example. So the culture industry is therefore about teaching that people must have no agency, only operations run the show and nothing more. Whatever element that is presented in the plot must be destroyed if it has any meaning. And so the plot twist is, in the culture industry, a way to keep the audience glued to their seats so that they can never form any meaning. To be able to form meaning means that you are in charge, that you are an active agent, but the plot twist is a reminder that you are not in control of the meaning. Like, the protagonist who discovers a harsh truth that destroys everything that he built so far, to remind him that his fate is between the hands of the plot. And so the spectator is reminded that his meaning is not his, but it is the culture industry that decides on it. Quote, "The opening sequences state a plot motive so that destruction can work on it throughout the action. With the audience in gleeful pursuit, the protagonist is tossed about like a scrap of litter." So the plot twist is here to make sure that the audience knows that they cannot leave the theater, and as such they are taught that there is no alternative to whatever befalls on them. If stereotypes are the best weapons for fascism, like in the case of Nazi Germany, the biggest stereotype was the Jew, and there is a reason for it. Stereotypes keep us glued to our seats. They tell us that there is nothing that can be done, that at the end all we reach are dead ends, and so having agency is met with cynicism and mockery. But if claiming to have agency makes us appear like the village idiot, like the eccentric loner, then the only acceptable thing to value is the lack of agency. It is to be an object that is being tossed by the plot, by the government, by an ideology, by business, by the market. And so what we learn is to be cruel masochists. Quote, the quantity of organized amusement is converted into the quality of organized cruelty. The self-elected censors of the film industry, its accomplices, monitor the duration of the atrocity prolonged into a hunt. The jollity dispels the joy supposedly conferred by the sight of an embrace and postpones satisfaction until the day of the pogrom. So the first asterisk was originally the lust for murder instead of cruelty in 1944. So amusement serves as strengthening the quality of an organized lust for murder. Clearly this means that through amusement we are taught to lust for murder, and amusement organizes that lust, it channels it. And the second asterisk is more interesting. It says in the original version that the censors of the industry monitor the duration of the kiss and not the atrocity prolonged into the hunt. Now the 1944 version and the 1947 give two meanings to that sentence, but both of them converge. If we take the 1944 version, it means that the culture industry monitors the duration of a kiss, like it's a reference to the Hays Code again. So the industry censors everything related to sexuality or emotion, so sexual lust is being monitored and repressed, while atrocities that turn into a hunt are let loose. But in the 1947 version, which is the atrocities duration that monitored, doesn't mean that we are careful with it in the sense of we are aware of its danger, and so we want to contain it, but rather we channel it, we organize the atrocity, we prolong it into a hunt. We start with a kiss, and then we end up prolonging the atrocity into a hunt. It's certainly a reference to movies like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari or the movie M. Both are about fucked up people that in one case use hypnosis to commit crimes, and in the other it's a pedophile that kills children, and both movies are about hunting these dangerous individuals, and they are often hiding in the dark. And by the way, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is definitely a movie that fits what we said about plot twists. So go check it. I'm not gonna say a lot about it. Now the idea behind these movies is that there is some sort of evil that no one can see, like it's hiding in the shadows, and society must chase them away. So basically, amusement becomes scapegoat spotting. We identify randomly a group of people, and they become the legitimate recipient of all of our violence. Movies like M may sound normal because pedophiles are dangerous, but the movie is using the pedophile as a metaphor for something more. It's about, the breaking of all forms of resistance in order to confine to society. So the pedophile is seen as the consequence of someone who doesn't want to confine, who resists society. He becomes a pervert, a danger to the order. And the only way for him to try to justify himself is by saying that his pedophilia is a disease. Like he cannot control these urges, but the urges control him. So he must prove that he indeed doesn't have any agency over his action in order to save himself. He has to show that he is like everybody else. In that sentence, there is no... in that sense, he's no different from the people who are judging him. They have no agency over the social order like he has no agency over his urges. And so Adorno and Horkheimer are not talking about these specific movies here. He's focusing more on cartoons, but there's a book from another famous intellectual of the Frankfurt School and a teacher of Adorno. He's called Siegfried Kracauer, which addresses these movies. His book is called From Caligari to Hitler. The title is explicit, and I actually have it. So there it is, From Caligari to Hitler by Krakauer. So yeah, the title is quite explicit, as I said, and yeah, you can check it out. So, anyways, the point is that you are taught to offer no resistance to whatever happens to you, and you must like that, you must enjoy that, and the violence that ensues from that, you must enjoy it, just like Donald Duck. Quote, Donald Duck in the cartoons are the unfortunate victim in real life, and the unfortunate victim in real life receive their beatings so that the spectators can accustom themselves to theirs. The enjoyment of the violence done to the film character turns into violence against the spectator. Distraction becomes exertion. So basically, going to the movies is just to reproduce everything we have already internalized about reality. So, to sum up so far, we said that Enlightenment has chased away from reality everything that is suspected as superstition. With the production, with the mode of production, this idea that everything is now real, meaning that it is calculable, that it can be reduced to an equation, led to the development of a worldview in which everything must run like a machine. So only hardcore facts and numbers are real. And so from here, everything turns into a source to exploit, but anything that questions that exploitation is superstition. So the only thing real becomes power. Only raw power exists, and anything that tries to question it is a nominalist superstition. And so, since everything in the world is about this positivist reality, and the movies are in this reality, then movies cannot be about anything else but the same positivist reality. Movies, if they want to be profitable, they have to abide to the laws of the market, brought by positivist philosophy, and therefore they are obliged to reproduce the real world. So all movies are therefore realist, even if they don't, even if they are not about aliens or fairy tales. But then, if there is power and there is exploitation, there are people who are the victims of that power, and those are the people who go to the movies. So the victims of power go to see a movie in order to be reminded of the power that crushes them. And at this point, we can ask, what is the point of the industry if it's just reproducing what everyone is already familiar with? And more alarmingly, why are those who are the victims of this seek to reinforce their own exploitation? The authors answer that people who are the victims of power dynamic won't let go of the culture industry because at least the culture industry makes their plight a source of pleasure for at least a few hours. It turns the boredom of the housewife into an enjoyment, the back pain of the factory worker into a BDSM roleplay. So for a moment they can forget their pain, only to go back to it the minute the movie is over. So in short, it's like a drug, a painkiller, or more like a drug that turns your pain into a pleasure. As the authors say, the culture industry endlessly cheats its customers out of what it endlessly promises. So because the culture industry has the capacity of actually liberating the worker from his pain and the housewife from her boredom, it has the resources and the technology to turn exploitation into a collective ownership of the means of production and equal distribution of that production without ever having to worry about hunger. But the culture industry has cheated the consumers of what Enlightenment promised. Instead of working into realizing the project of Enlightenment, which is, the liberation and emancipation of people, it uses these resources for producing images that provide a few moments of pleasure. So the pain of life imposed by oppressive societies become the final stage of life. We have reached the end and there is nothing but pain. The promise of deliverance from this pain is always postponed as if non-existent, or as something that is in the beyond that Enlightenment has disenchanted. Quote, the promise, which actually comprises the entire show, disdainfully intimates that there is nothing more to come, that the dinner must be satisfied with reading the menu. So the pleasure of the pleasure of the now in movies, the present, that's a simulacra. It's a forced pleasure, a pleasure of the lesser evil, if you want. Knowing that there is no escape from routine, I am forced to enjoy it. So the promise of a better tomorrow only reinforces the belief that there is no tomorrow. It must be grasped, as we said, just as a superstition. And so the worker and the housewife can only enjoy that promise when they know that it is not coming. You can only enjoy Santa's gift when you know that he doesn't exist, basically. So the pleasure we get from the culture industry is a pleasure from repressing our pleasures. Once I repress my pleasure, as in when I don't believe that through collective action tomorrow will be better, then I can enjoy the pleasure offered by the culture industry. I can experience that pleasure in its positivist denial. I posit that communism is forever a dream, then I can experience the pleasure of living in the communist utopia for a few hours in a movie theater. So instead of sublimating suffering like genuine works of art do, the culture industry represses pleasure. In sublimation, the pain and suffering are turned into actual pleasure because there is a real transformation of society. The pain engendered in oppressive societies is used by genuine works of art as the potential for future revolutions. So in sublimation, the communist utopia is already here. It is in the here and now. The potential for social revolution is already present. It is in sexuality, it is in philosophy, it is in the circus, it is in the cartoon, it is in art, etc. What is denied is preserved and rescued in sublimation. But the culture industry doesn't rescue the denial. Okay, it's not doing sublimation. That's the problem. It maintains it as denial. People must know positively that there is no potential for revolution in sexuality. Sexuality must be denied and remain a taboo. It's not going to be sublimated. Once the people do that, once they have suppressed and repressed their own sexuality, then they will have some lust to experience. It is when you deny yourself sex that you can have sexual pleasure, but in the form of pornography. You can have some lust to experience as long as the lust is organized, as long as it is monitored, allowed and approved by the culture industry. So again, sexuality becomes the song of the sirens, and like Odysseus, it must only be watched from a distance. Quote, by constantly exhibiting the object of desire, the breasts beneath the sweater, the naked torso of the sporting hero, it merely goads the unsublimated anticipation of pleasure, which through the habit of denial has long since been mutilated as masochism. So in other words, only the mutilated, the impotent, the eunuch, or the eunuch, don't know how it is pronounced, not sure. But anyway, only those who cannot have sex can have sexual pleasure. So being incapable is what's truly arousing in the culture industry. Despite its portrayal of attractive men and women on the screen, it's like knowing that things won't go further than that. The culture industry maintains the spectator in a never-ending process of flirting, if you want. We look, we drool, but we don't ever get to touch each other. We never get to kiss one another. We don't get to hug. We don't get to fuck. We are as prudish as we love pornography. So, as the authors say, the Hays Code is like the myth of Tantalus. So in Greek mythology, Tantalus was a mythical king who tried to make the gods eat his son Pelops, like he cut Pelops and boiled him and then offered him as a meal for the gods. And so the gods, since they are omniscient, they knew what was in the menu, and so they punished Tantalus. And so Pelops was brought back to life, but his father was sent to Tartarus, so the place in which fucked up people are tortured. And his punishment was to stand in a pool of water beneath a tree with low branches, but whenever he's thirsty, he bows down to drink the water, but the water recedes, and so he can never drink it, he can never reach the water, and when he tries to grasp to take some fruits when he is hungry, while the branches go up so he can never reach them. And so that's what the culture industry is doing to us. It turns us into Tantalus. We can only watch, never touch. We are passive to this extent. Everything great about human beings must be cut off. It must be mutilated, turned inoffensive, and integrated within the system. So love, one of the greatest powers of humans, is mutilated. Its revolutionary aspirations is neglected as it becomes just about romance, about procreating for the sake of maintaining the nuclear family, the vessel of capitalism, of course. So sexuality and libertinage are permitted as long as romance is the norm, since love's reduction to romance makes sexuality marketable. So sexuality is integrated into romance, which means that that it sexually only serves the purpose of romance. The daring men, more than the woman, of course, by being the rebel, the uncontrollable force of nature, the lustful lone rider, is marketable. And so the point of sex appeal is so that he gets into a romance with a prude small town girl, which then, must repress his sexuality by taming him. So love and sexuality are allowed as far as they bring their own repression. So the mutilated, the masochist kind of love promoted by the culture industry is self-love, or more like, loving copies of oneself. Since the point of the industry is to make whatever it is thrown to us ubiquitous, when it comes to love, we are taught to love what we see on the screen. We only see an image of how we should be, so the characters on the screen are a copy of ourselves, and we must love those copies. When I see a movie about a romance, I am actually loving the guy or the person with whom I am told to identify. I reproduce the guy. He's the one I am in love with, and likewise, women are taught to fall in love with small Texas town girl. So in romances, the partners are actually more invested in reproducing the copy of themselves than loving the other partner. So that's what romances teach, is that love's potential for action should be oriented towards the self and not others. So the individual is just in a relationship with the rest of society's members, like a lover towards a beloved in a romance movie. They are just coexisting, but each is after their own interests. Each trying to shape the other according to their own interests. So the man must be the wild, violent beast so that the woman tames him, and the woman must be the docile, fragile creature for the beast to exist. So the brutality of the man shapes the submission of the woman, while the woman's submission shapes the brutality of the man. And so the brutality of the man that shapes the submission of the woman, so that he can have his sexual desires, while the submission of the woman shapes the brutality of the man to make him a provider that can, ensure her survival. So both are working towards the patriarchal triumph over beauty. Through their excessive cult of individuality, beauty is giving a certain standard that is reproduced over and over again. Beauty which too, like love, has its revolutionary potential and is now made impotent. When it should work in order to emancipate social relations, beauty is going to be used to repress them even more. Beauty then becomes literally like the submissive girl, inoffensive. It poses no threat to the system that can now finally laugh triumphantly. So laughter is also discussed by Adorno and Horkheimer as another potential thing for revolution deprived of its potential. Humor, he says, is the malicious pleasure elicited by any successful deprivation. So when you take something away from people, they suddenly laugh. Like someone who has lost everything, from whom everything was taken away, starts laughing. Or it can also be understood in the other way, that we laugh at someone once we deprive them of something. So in both cases, what is highlighted is the recognition of the deprived person's helplessness. Either they laugh out of helplessness, or we laugh at them because of their helplessness, because they are no threat, because they have lost everything at their disposal to give them agency. So as the authors say, we laugh at their nothingness. There is laughter because there is nothing to laugh about. So laughter has no object, if you want. So in what way laughter, like beauty and love, is mutilated? Well, the author distinguished between two types of laughter. There is reconciled laughter and there is terrible laughter. They also call terrible laughter wrong laughter. So what's the difference? Well, it starts with what they have in common. He says that they both are triggered once a fear is over. Like, it's a feeling that we've been released from danger, either physical or as they call it, the grip of logic. What this means about the grip of logic is when we see a breach in the system, an opening from enlightenment. So cartoons make us laugh because they defy logic, because they can also make us laugh while we are but they can also make us laugh when we are still in the grip of logic. This is where the distinction lies. They say reconciled laughter resounds with the echo of escape from power. Wrong laughter copes with fear by defecting to the agencies which inspire it. It echoes the inescapability of power. So there is a laughter that is legit, let's say, because the danger of the power has been defied, but another type of laughter that makes us compliant with that same power. So laughter of the second kind is when the audience laughs in movie theaters. It's an obstacle to happiness, like the promise to the housewife and the worker. Laughter here is a substitute to happiness. Once you give up on happiness, you are allowed to have that pleasure that comes from laughing. It's again like an addictive painkiller being prescribed indefinitely so that you don't get the treatment. Laughter is part of the disease, if you want. They say, in wrong society, laughter is a sickness infecting happiness and drawing it into society's worthless totality. So laughter is a way for the totality of the system to maintain itself by incorporating individuals to its ideology by making them laugh. It's like cheerfulness and smiles are imposed on us. You know those dystopians where people are forced to laugh, forced to be happy? Well, this is what we are talking about here. It's an obligation to be an optimist. Whatever bad that happens, you must welcome it with laughter. Always look on the bright side and have a laugh. But as Adorno and Horkheimer remind us, in sick societies, laughter about something is always laughter at it. And the vital force which, according to Bergson, bursts through rigidity and laughter is, in truth, the eruption of barbarity, the self-assertion which, in convivial settings, dares to celebrate its liberation from scruple. Okay, so let's unpack this long sentence. First, laughter about something is always at that thing. In the society of pain and repression, the only thing we can laugh about is our powerlessness. When tragedy hits you and you are told to laugh about it, in reality we laugh about the fact that you couldn't do anything about it. But giving the power structures in place which purposefully want to integrate everything within its structure, then to laugh about something becomes to laugh at it. Remember, the culture industry wants to maintain the power relations between people so that the rich stays rich while the poor stays poor. So if laughter is something prescribed to the poor, the culture industry must find a way to return it against the poor so that the poor stays poor. So to laugh about the tragedy that is poverty because becomes to laugh at the poor. Okay, laughter loses its revolutionary potential and becomes a weapon, a tool for oppression. Its vital force is captured by the culture industry and it is weaponized. So the vital force here is a reference to the French philosopher Henri Bergson, who argued that everything is permeated with a vital force that makes it move. But this movement for Bergson is fluid and creative. But it can become rigid and mechanical. When the movement becomes mechanical, it means predictable. Like everything about it is now known. I know everything about the behavior of a human being now. Like I know everything about how they are supposed to react, how they walk, how they will talk, etc. But then I see someone trip and fall, and I am taken by laughter. And so for Bergson, I am laughing because something has broken the rigidity of human movement. Like human beings are not supposed to fall. So when that happens, I'm seeing a machine that turned out to be not as predictable as we thought it is. And so this is what we call the theory of incongruity. When you think that things will go a certain way, but turns out that they went another way. And so this laughter for Bergson is that vital force forcing its way through the machine, through the mechanical, and looking for something new. Laughter for Bergson is when we become conscious that we didn't exhaust all the possibilities of being. But with the culture industry, that vital force bursting through rigidity becomes the eruption of barbarity. When I see someone fall in the culture industry, I am letting my barbarity loose. I laugh at him. I feel that I have no reason to restrain myself from ridiculing others. I don't laugh because it's an occasion for creating something new or because it's a proof that the system isn't working. That can be a nice way to look at it, that when I see people losing everything and fall into poverty, I see it as a failure of the system. Like poverty is the system that falls instead of a guy, walking, and I can laugh at that system as in to say it is time for something new. But the culture industry redirects that laughter at the poor. Even if it's not direct at the poor, the simple fact that the laughter is captured by the culture industry means that it's not going to serve the poor in any way. It therefore becomes just a tool to reinforce his status as a poor individual, helpless, hopeless, and powerless. And so that's why Adorno and Horkheimer mentioned in the passage we're reading Baudelaire and Hölderlin, two famous poets. The former is French and the other is German, so during Romanticism, and they were known for their pessimistic writings, like there's nothing cheerful in their poetry, and they both had such contempt towards laughter, especially Baudelaire. He believed laughter to be satanical. Like for Adorno, laughter in the context of the culture industry reinforces alienation and keeps us separate from one another. It turns humanity into its parody. He writes, "The collective of those who laugh parodies humanity. They are monads, each abandoning himself to the pleasure at the expense of all others, and with the majority in support of being ready to shrink from nothing. Their harmony presents a caricature of solidarity." So when you have a collective of people laughing, you see a parody, because normally a collective of people should be united in the sense of solidarity. Laughter itself becomes its own parody because it is supposed to bring in that solidarity. But that would be a reconciled laughter. Wrong laughter keeps each one of the individuals apart, as in isolated from the collective. None of them have their individuality, since for Adorno and Horkheimer, individuality isn't an opposition to the collective, but when there is a real solidarity between the members of the collective, that's where you can get individuality. So here the collective simply gives an illusion, a caricature of solidarity. The individuality that is worshipped is more like solitude or alienation, even an alienation from oneself, rather than, real individuality. So Adorno calls this pseudo-individuality, and it's a notion that we will come back to it many times throughout the book. So even reconciliation, as he says, is parodied and caricatured. So wrong laughter turns reconciliation into a parody. It's only in appearance that the collective has reconciliation. Again, this is the same principle. You give up on the belief that reconciliation is real and you will experience it as a parody through wrong laughter. It's like with Stoicism and how they distinguish between true and false joy. Adorno quotes the Stoic philosopher Seneca. Seneca was a Roman philosopher during the reign of Emperor Nero, and he is famous for his letters to his friend, a certain Lucilius. And Adorno refers to the letter 23, in which Seneca said, "Joy, however, is austere, res severa verum gaudium." That's the Latin for the thing that is austere or stern is real joy. Res means things, severa means austere, verum the true or real, and gaudium means joy. So that's taken from the letter 23, and in it Seneca tells Lucilius that true joy comes from the things that actually matter. He says that when you see people expressing joy because of things external to them, like, the weather, for example, their joy is fake. It's a fake joy because it depends on something outside of their control. It depends on the fate. They depend on the outside rather than what is inside them, and as such you cannot say that someone is joyful only through their external behavior or expression. Someone who laughs, and this is something Seneca says in the letter, is someone who laughs is certainly feeling something pleasant, but unless it comes from within, it's not a joyful laughter. In other words, what is a simulation cannot be called true joy. If I'm simulating, joy by forced laughter, you cannot, say that I am really experiencing joy. So joy is austere in the sense that you cannot see it on the face. It can only be perceived in detachment from external things or from surfaces. You cannot see joy on the face of someone who laughs. It's like when people are shocked when they hear of the suicide of someone who always appears in a cheerful mood. A cheerful mood isn't an indication of joy. Nothing can point to joy because joy, real joy, is detached from immediacy. So real joy is an asceticism. It's about the denial of the immediate, of the first image that comes to the mind, but it's an asceticism of the sexual act. Like, we are not denying the sexual act, but rather see it more than just, the immediate pleasure or ideological love, but the potential for a revolution towards a free and just society. In the culture industry, it's the opposite. The within, the internal, the austere joy is denied for the sake of the surface, the manageable, the fleeting. It affirms the ideology of monasteries in which the sexual act is denied, where the idea of attainable bliss is abandoned. So the authors highlight that the ideology of monasteries, where monks would retire to lead a life of worship, is not asceticism but a denial of sex. Like, monastery life teaches that you cannot have bliss in this world. You must abandon it for the promise of a greater bliss in the afterlife. So it is like the culture industry, even though the culture industry keeps sex in front of our eyes constantly. So in both cases, the monastery and the industry, the sexual act is denied along with interiority. The lover in the industry must stick to the fleeting moment that is an artificial love manufactured by the screen. He has to renounce the revolutionary and emancipatory power of love in order to experience a sterile kind of love. Like in monastery life, one has to renounce sexual bliss in order to have an erotic relationship. Like in both cases, real eroticism is denied. So even real pain is denied. Pain, like we said, once sublimated, can reveal so many possibilities for being, but even that is denied by the industry. It must be replaced by jovial denial. Like, we must enjoy denial. Whenever we deny, we must enjoy that. The more things we lack, the more we must express joy. And so that's what the culture industry does. The more destitute you are, the happier you must be. That's why we said in the concept of enlightenment that we always have to keep appearances in front of us, because the immediate is by its essence a denial. Enlightenment teaches that whatever is in front of our eyes is a lie, and there is no way out of lies, and therefore the only option we have left is to laugh at our situation. That's why enlightenment is mass deception. Quote, its supreme law is that its consumers shall at no price be giving what they desire. And in that very deprivation, they must take their laughing satisfaction. In each performance of the culture industry, the permanent denial imposed by civilization is once more inflicted on and unmistakably demonstrated to its victims. To offer them something and to withhold it is one and the same. So laughter becomes a sign of lack. People laugh because they are denied their object of desire. So laughter is a confirmation of defeat. It's a confirmation of impotence. The pleasure from laughter is therefore seen as a compensation the culture industry gives in exchange for this deprivation. So the industry takes power away from you to submit you to its own power, but offers you some sort of inoffensive pleasure to make you cope with this loss. So the industry gives you pornography when it knows that you can no longer have sex. It sexualizes everything once it knows that sex is no longer an option for people. Quote, that is what the erotic commotion achieves. Just because it can never take place, everything revolves around the coitus. So the essence of the culture industry is the threat of castration. So political oppressive systems thrive on this. They castrate the population so that the population is powerless and cannot overthrow that system. And instead they will give the impression that the system is working for the benefit of that population. So politicians are basically telling us that since we don't have any power to change anything, because we are castrated, they will run everything for us. In the text there is an asterisk about castration being the essence of the culture industry, which refers to the text On Jazz by Adorno, in which you can read the following. So this taken from the essay On Jazz by Adorno. By learning to fear social authority and experiencing it as a threat of castration and immediately as fear of impotence, it identifies itself with precisely this authority of which it is afraid. So, if we try to resist, to give up on power, the social order cuts it off and gives us a simulation of it. We can experience democracy if we accept to be governed by the dictator. And as such, the culture industry isn't simply the result of liberalism or capitalism, but exists in every system that is solely based on the concept of enlightenment. The Soviet Union, as well as fascism and nationalism, despite their open opposition to liberalism, are also castrators. They promise to liberate their people from the exploitation of capital as long as they stay in power. And so the point of the culture industry isn't much the liberal market or the growth of capital or even Puritanism per se. It's not even foreign hegemony. Instead, the culture industry is about drilling into people's head that resistance is futile, and if resistance there can be, it is for the powerful to do it, the clever, not the stupid. So the force of the culture industry resides in keeping people in a state of infancy, completely dependent on it. The industry is the only one that can attend to your needs, and so without it you are nothing and you will die. So without conforming, you are exposed to death. You have no protection, no rights, no community to have your back, no economic security. The only way to survive is to be forever a consumer. And a satisfied, a happy consumer, nonetheless. Like whatever the industry gives you, you must accept and be happy with it. Always put on a happy smile and laugh every time the industry slaps you in the face. Show gratitude and be thankful as the industry stomps you with its leather boots. And you show that gratitude by going to the movies. You go to the movies, listen to radios, read magazines. All of these are present like escapism from a world from which there is no escape. And so the culture industry is the one that traps you into this closed world and offers you the screen as a pseudo escape from it. So by escaping the real world through the screen, through amusement, you are actually back to that real world. But it would be a mistake to consider amusement only as the opposite of art, even the uncontrolled type of amusement that we are referring to here. It's not just an opposite, but it is the complementary extreme of art. What Adorno means by this is that art and amusement, they actually need each other. If art tries to be art in the sense that it must be pure art, like without any trace of amusement, then art also becomes amusement. Like we said, the culture industry is about homogeneity. It wants to achieve something pure, so the more art wants to take itself seriously, like art wants to be nothing else but serious art, it is becoming amusement. When you have critics, or again, teachers, who want you to stick to formal laws and rules when you make art, and they think that's how you save art from amusement, well, they are wrong. Amusement doesn't mean the absence of labor or the only presence of fun. Amusement is when there is only one thing, either through presence or absence. When you want to make fun disappear completely, when fun must be completely absent, it is no different from when you want fun to be the only thing present. So if the goal of art is to liberate human beings from the toil of labor, if art becomes serious as opposed to the seriousness of existence, like when art becomes a pretext to forget about existence seriousness, then it becomes the burden of labor. It becomes its own antithesis. Again, the problem isn't labor, but the burden of labor. And likewise, when amusement becomes pure, it simply gives the illusion that the burden of labor has been lifted. The possibility of lifting the burden is giving in the culture industry, but what is never given is its realization. Okay? Again, fun is never allowed in the industry. Pure amusement is not fun, it's the opposite, it is work, as we said. So pure amusement is therefore a way for the system to maintain itself through this illusion. And so the purpose of amusement is fun, but in the culture industry, it's actually power. Okay, there is no fun, again, in the culture industry. When you watch a movie, the goal is more to show the stars, the glamorous life, the myth of success at the ceremony awards, rather than, or the award ceremonies, rather than, showing fun. Quote, every kiss in the review film must contribute to the career of the boxer or hit song expert whose success is being glorified. So there lies the deception of the culture industry. What is seen on the screen isn't even for amusement or plain fun. It's about sticking to an agenda. It's about doing the same thing that is being done in factories. It is to perform an assembly line task. In short, it's about business. It's about work. Quote, the deception is not that the culture industry serves up amusement, but that it spoils the fun by its business-minded attachment to the ideological cliches of the culture which is liquidating itself. So by the culture industry liquidating itself, we mean that it's no longer the culture that matters, but the brand name of those who produce it. We don't care if we even watched the movie to judge its validity as a work of art. The fact that it was a box office hit is enough. The fact that the actors who played in the movie are famous and rich is enough. The review of audiences is actually a joke. The audience is castrated. Its review means shit, actually. It is just used at best as a measurement for the next movie. Producer would use the reviews just to know how much money they can get out of the pocket of the movie goer if they make a sequel or whatever. So even a movie that produces simple unbridled amusement, simple fun, is looked at with suspicion. It's simply naive. Simple fun means a movie that doesn't aim at being a a hit at the box office, meaning a movie that produces fun like the Lotus Eaters in the Odyssey. That is, according to Adorno and Horkheimer, as naive as a movie with intellectual content. If you do a movie that is about basic fun, you have in there a revolutionary potential because it is something that the industry won't be able to compute or make a profit from. And likewise, intellectualism is like unbridled fun. In both cases, it is condemned by the industry's ethics and taste. So the industry draws on the idea that everything must serve a greater purpose, and it is true that morality often looks at fun as being naive because it doesn't serve any moral purpose. The industry, however, decides on what the purpose should be, and as they write, the culture industry is corrupt not as a sink of iniquity, but as the cathedral of higher gratification. So everything is therefore forced to justify itself, to justify its own existence. For if something didn't aim or produce a higher gratification, a bigger house or a bigger check, it is accused of sin. Everything in culture, whether low or high, whether serious or light art, must provide justification for its existence, and by this we mean that it must prove that it can turn a profit. So in short, everything must lie about itself in order to conform to the system of higher gratification. Everything must deny its purpose. The culture industry has the biggest possible power over the castrated because not only it denies the castrated its purpose, that, for example, of the sexual act, but then orders it to find another purpose for its existence in order to be allowed to exist. So the authors are not really against meaninglessness, like they're not against the circus. What they are against is the compulsive nature of industry to demand justification from its victim, which in its nature doesn't have to provide justifications. The circus, that's the point of the circus, it doesn't provide any justifications. So the revolutionary potential of the circus, of sexuality, of art, is that it doesn't abide to the demands for justification, for the obligation to bring about a higher gratification. Therefore, the industry cuts short its power by forcing it to have a higher gratification, to produce more than what's already there. So, in the circus, as Adorno promotes it, what we have is the capacity for self-justification. Bodies, for example, don't have to rely on higher notions like the soul to justify their existence. They exist in their own right. In the circus, clowns, acrobats, and riders put on a show based on skills and expertise, but that is nonsensical or meaningless. Meaningless here means that it doesn't rely on something external or higher. And these features are present in the culture industry, as Adorno says, quoting the playwright Frank Wedkind, in the defense and justification of physical as against intellectual art. Like physical art is often taken less seriously than intellectual art, it's always asked to justify itself through some sort of higher order. So we see that Adorno isn't against low or high art, or isn't privileging intellectual art over physical art. Instead, what he is criticizing is that the industry what the industry does to physical, low, and light art. He says, the hiding places of mindless artistry, which represents what is human against the social mechanism, are being relentlessly fettered out by organizational reason, which forces everything to justify itself in terms of meaning and effect. It is causing meaninglessness to disappear at the lowest level of art, just as radically as meaning is disappearing at the highest. So in other words, low culture is supposed to have features of meaninglessness, of absurdity in it, like in the novels of Mark Twain. Absurdity and meaninglessness have the vital force in them, like we mentioned with Bergson. It is a call for novelty. The industry makes that meaninglessness disappear in low culture, and at the same time it prevents high forms of art to even create meaning. So we end up having neither meaninglessness in low culture nor meaning in high culture. We are stuck in just a circle eating itself up with sameness. So in the end, what is meaningful becomes meaningless, and vice versa, leaving to neither one the chance to actually form, to be itself, but must be everything else, in constant reproduction of the same and of the familiar. When I see a movie, I must not see something new. For something new to be seen as new, it must become itself. And so that becoming is, of course, denied. I cannot even distinguish between what is meaningful and what is meaningless anymore. I see the world moving, changing, things are improving. The new smartphone has better features, but like with Seneca, all of these improvements are not with the things that matter. Or better yet, I cannot even know if they matter. I don't even know what matters anymore because everything looks the same. And so this is the only prospect for the future. Quote, in an age of liberal expansion, amusement was sustained by an unbroken belief in the future. Things would stay the same and yet get better. So we must have that belief, even intellectualize it. Everything must get better while staying the same. Whatever thing I have now, I must make it seem better in the future. Like stereotypes must only become even more stereotypical, cliches must be even more cliche. The only purpose we can think of is the same but better. Like movies are about the same world we live in, but better. The real world is the smartphone you have right now. The world in movies is the new iPhone. Same thing, but with different features. So this is the principle of advertising. Like in advertising, we promote the image of something better than the product that we sell. So in the ad, the new phone, the alcoholic beverage, the new car, all promote a world in which the product provides the denied desires. Freedom, community, simplicity. These are the same products that we use in our miserable lives, but through advertising, they reinforce the belief that we just mentioned, the belief in the same but better. So the same applies to our world. Everything in it must point at that purpose. Amusement has no other purpose but to reenact that belief. The higher values like freedom and camaraderie have been denied and can only be experienced as a simulation, as stereotypes, always in the hope of being achieved while never achieved. So, as they say, amusement itself becomes an ideal. Taking the place of the higher values, it eradicates from the masses by repeating them in an even more stereotyped form than the advertising slogans paid for by private interests. So the culture industry has brought the end of human emotion. Emotion too must be marketable, meaning that it has better versions, meaning that its better version is always the one we see on the screen, on the light novels published in serial forms in magazines, often destined to women, and not in our real lives. We've been also denied the right to feel anyways. So amusement is a purging of the industry's chosen undesirable emotions and polishes them into an inoffensive image. It does what drama does according to Aristotle and movies according to Mortimer Adler. Adorno and Horkheimer mention both of these philosophers at the end of the section. Aristotle is known for the concept of catharsis, which means purging the emotions. He believed that the reason why people like to watch tragedies about tragic heroes who take their eyes out after they realize that they murdered their father and knocked up their mothers, it's because we need to experience those emotions of dread, but from a safe distance. So seeing a tragedy is like we purify ourselves from these feelings. We see them on stage, and it's like we have emptied ourselves from them, and we can go back to our normal lives. And for Adler, Mortimer Adler, he was an American philosopher, a contemporary of Adorno and Horkheimer, and he wrote books on how to bring philosophy to the general public. He's also a neo-Thomist, meaning that he's a follower of the theologian and philosopher Saint Thomas Aquinas, and he wrote about cinema and how cinema purges us from, negative emotions using scholastic arguments. Like, he believed that there is a hierarchy between people in their relation to truth, like who's the closest to it. First you had Christians, then philosophers, then artists, and then at the lowest, mass consumers. And he believed that each group had their assigned mediums through which they can ascend. Like, Christians had the Bible, philosophers had reason and philosophy, artists obviously had art, and then the consumers, they had pop culture, they had cinema. So he believed that cinema is like catharsis, but for the modern man. It's like, it's a medium that will purge the mass consumer from earthly inclinations so that they can, start their transcendence, if you want. It's weird, but the idea is that the culture industry is basically doing a sort of catharsis, except that it makes our emotions obsolete. Maybe I'll do a close reading of Adler, because he's a fun guy, and he also worked for the Hayes office, by the way. He was asked to make a defense of cinema during the Hayes Code's time, and his hierarchy was developed in the book he produced as a defense of cinema called Art and Prudence in 1937. Maybe I'll do a few videos on it one day, but that's it for now. That's it for now. The culture industry is basically a catharsis, but it makes our emotions obsolete. Like, it purges our emotions as to make them obsolete, as to get rid of all of their power, in order to force us to conform into the status quo. So that's it for this section, and next week we will talk more. About it. We will talk about this idea of catharsis and in the fourth section.